On this week's episode, we talk with Lance Brozdowski from the Marquee Sports Network. We'll talk about driveline, pitch mix trends, recent high-valued contracts, breakout rookie pitchers, the ATC projections, and much more. All that coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and Ruvain Guy is not here today. It is just me solo on this ATC day. Happy ATC day to everybody. We have just dropped projections across all of our sites. And enjoy, and it's opening day of fantasy baseball prep season for everybody here. But we've got a fantastic episode today. We want to welcome in from Marquee Sports, Lance Brozdowski. How are you, Lance?
Hey, what's going on? You'll be hyped to know that the first player I looked at for an ATC projection was the Nationals' Jake Irvin. So I think that's a 101, right? I imagine everyone's going to go to Ohtani or Judge, and I, of course, was on Jake Irvin's page because I'm crazy, and that was the first ATC projection I saw.
And what do you think so far?
It's not good. It's not good. I'll tell you that. 4.78. I think that Nats' new pitching department in Brass is going to have to make some changes. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, the Nationals are not the key pitching department of Major League Baseball, but hey, you never know.
Exactly.
Well, anyways, just want to start a little bit about yourself. I want you to introduce yourself. What do you do for Marquee Sports? How did you get there, and how did you come to work in player analysis?
Yeah. So I am a player development analyst with Marquee Sports Network, which is the Chicago Cubs regional sports network. Very similar if you're on the East Coast to like Yes Network or Nesson or anything along those lines. We're just on the Cubs specifically. I was an accountant actually for a brief period of time in the city of Boston. I went to UMass Amherst undergrad and then did a really hard pivot out. Went to journalism school at Northwestern out here in the Midwest. And that has kind of shepherded me into sports. I got pretty lucky, landed a gig right when Marquee started back in 2020 and didn't really have the intention of doing on-air stuff, and it's kind of turned into that now, where I'm doing a bit more with MLB Network and also on air a lot with Marquee, and I think I'll be on air more this year with Marquee, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, it's an interesting hybrid role where I do a lot of video editing, I do a lot of helping our talent here with player analysis. I also do my own player analysis and then deliver it on camera, which is, I think, somewhat unique in the industry of having someone who can like crunch the numbers and then also kind of iterate and deliver the information. But I think it gives me like a subtle edge because I'm able to kind of do my own research, so to speak, and know exactly what I'm looking for as opposed to having to build narratives off like what other people are giving me from a research standpoint. But yeah, that's the gig I have. Also have a YouTube channel, Substack, which maybe you've come across as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're living the dream here. I mean, we got like Mike Petriello, who's made it to ESPN. He started at Fangraphs.
Yes.
Alex Fast, who does a great job for MLB, and he's actually done some of the Orioles Statcast broadcasts. Yep. There you go. Do you think that there will be a move to see more analytics in sports broadcasts going forward? Like, are teams going to be giving the Statcast broadcast much more often?
It's a great question. I know we floated it a bit here. I don't want to say recently at Marquee, but probably a couple of years ago, we did like a gambling simulcast, which I didn't really enjoy too much, but I thought that should literally just be a StatCast broadcast, because at the end of the day, a lot of gambling is just immediately tied to what you're trying to project from a stat standpoint. So I'm not sure if we're going to see more of it. I think the regional sports network market is in a bit of an odd spot from a monetary and budgeting standpoint, and I think that prevents some innovation. Which is unfortunate, but I think that's kind of the reality of it. I think that there is perhaps an appetite for it. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it in a way that is both cost efficient and good. And that is often a difficult balance to strike in the media space, as I've come to know. But I hope there is more of it. I would like to see more integration of statistics in like a clever way into main broadcasts. I think for the most part, ESPN's done a really good job of that. But I also know with the national rights going to NBC now, some people are like, no, I'm excited for just having good old school baseball, just tell me the storylines, etc. But I do think there is a way to like integrate stats into broadcasts better. And I think it comes through the talent. Like Apple TV's done a good job, but I think they've done a really bad job in terms of trying to integrate probability statistics, which they just like put on the bottom of the right screen and leave for the entire game. with no context ever addressed, or at least in the games I've watched, I've never seen a broadcaster and analyst kind of play around with, hey, here's how they're coming to that percentage, and here's maybe why you would disagree with it. Like, that would be a really easy way, just like attach a talent to it, make like a second sideline reporter tied specifically to probabilities that are interesting on screen, and make sure they could deliver them in a way that engages people. So that's what I hope we see more of. I don't necessarily know if we'll see like entire broadcasts dedicated to it outside of ESPN.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, TV has that question in general. Do you want to appeal to everybody?
That's a great point.
Right, and so you want to introduce a little bit of a flavor for everybody who wants to see that, or do you want to have very compartmentalization and separation of everything, and only appeal to people between the ages of 7 and 10, whereas you can see a whole a family show that appeals to everybody, right? You have that question all the time. So I guess baseball still has to tackle that kind of question. I want to talk a little news. There's been a couple of recent player acquisitions this past week. Kyle Tucker that we broke on this show, and then Bo Bichette signed with my New York Mets. Wow, that is someone I did not expect, being that the Mets have about 8 Major League ready infielders. What is your take on those two, whether they're worth the money and what they mean for the respective clubs?
Yeah, I think I saw something on one of the social media networks that I laughed at. Was like that there's like that cereal box that says like whoops all berries, but they change it to like whoops all second baseman for the Mets, and I did get a giggle out of it, even though I know Bo's projected to play third base. There are some teams that I think you could play around and have some fun with. Bull signings are interesting to me. I think the Bo one is very unexpected. I'll start with Tucker just because I have a little more direct one-on-one experience interacting with him in both, watching almost every single game he played last year with the Cubs. Yeah, so I think, listen, at the beginning of the year, he was unbelievable. I think that Cubs fans had been clamoring for like a star in that lineup for an extended period of time, and he definitely brought that for the first couple months of the season. It was electric. He was absolutely on fire, and then he just fell off really hard. And as we look back now, retrospectively, and also in the season, we started to understand, I think Enos Harris has pointed out one of the ways to kind of ID injury without the player saying it is through bat speed drops, and he like really, really tanked his bat speed midway through the season. And it seemed like it was unreported, although it sounded like the Cubs said it was reported. But from my understanding on the media side, like it wasn't. He was dealing with like a broken finger, I guess it was, or hand, excuse me, one or the other. Correct me if I'm wrong on either, but. Basically, he was playing through a broken hand, and I think that what we run into sometimes with guys hitting contract years is like, I'm just gonna play. And we saw him like really corral his strike zone. Even when he was literally playing with a broken hand, he was still about a league average player, if I remember correctly. And that is the raw talent of him. He's really good strike zone control, and I think last year was a bit of an anomaly from like a raw power standpoint, where we saw him like dip to I think his lowest slug of the last like 6-7 years that he's had and played in Major League Baseball, but. Yeah, I mean, I do think he fits probably well in Los Angeles. He's not the biggest media guy. He's a really quiet dude. And if he just wants to not be heckled by the New York media every day, then I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go to the Dodgers, where he's going to be like the 6th person on everyone's list to talk to in a clubhouse.
It's crazy, right? It's
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, if they're trying to upgrade a specific spot, Conforto wasn't good. I mean, the natural place to go is Kyle Tucker, who you have projected for like right around 40% above average from a WRC plus standpoint, which, I mean, that's what he's done for the majority of his career. He's a metronome from a non-base standpoint, and I know the Dodgers are going to value that. Any team's going to value that. Bichette is an interesting one. He's one where, like, one thing I was going to ask you about around projections is, like, how do you deal with seasons that so his 2024 was bad, right? He played 81 games, and he really wasn't good. But if you look in the context of his career, it was an outlier, and we got confirmation of that through 2025. So when you're looking at like the past few years of data, and you see like 30% above average, 30% below average, and then like 25% above average, how do you weight that 2024 from a modeling standpoint without getting too into the details? But like, is there a rough structure as to how you would present that in the data? Because it feels like an anomaly to me. Like, I'm looking at the projection and going, I don't even know if I would consider 2024. But I know you have to bake some of it in, but is it almost like I want to flip it and make it 2 years ago such that it's a little more unweighted than the recent data? Like, I imagine that's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I mean, it reminds me of my college years when I had a teacher who said, listen, if you get an A on 2 tests and you get a C on another test, obviously you're an A student. That was just a bad day, right?
Yeah.
You know,
maybe.
maybe. But at least you also have, sort of an A- average. So ATC obviously operates differently than other projections because it brings a lot of projections together. I do some Marcel type stuff where I do weight the years, and I can tell you that I do go through some of the players that had some kind of injury for some years, and I try to discredit that a little bit. So instead of having, let's say, a 60-30-10 past 3 years, if that 1 year was an aberration because of a fluke of an injury or played through something that I can identify. You can't always identify. I do try to temper that weight just a little bit. I don't know quite what other projections do, but it is a projection blind spot, right? It's where you take data and you're weighting everything 60-30-10 for the past 3 years. And you don't know exactly what the cause of it is. You can see that line, and if you're just looking pure numbers, you say, well, it's a down year. It factors in as part of a projection, but you got to give it. The same thing can happen with a fluke good year, right? Do you discredit some really good year in the same way, and you say, wow, that was just a special and outlier? Cal Raleigh, hit 60 homers this year. Do you discredit that and say, well, that's the 90th percentile of his. He's not going to get that anymore, right? So it is a projections blind spot, and because you're taking a blend of different multiple years, it does factor into that. But where I can, in the ATC projections, the part of my projection that does a Marcel type thing, I do try to take that on. Very slightly, there's still regression.
I guess the quick question here I'll ask is, do you find that your manual adjustments actually make those individual players more accurate from a projection standpoint, or is this one of those things where you manually adjust and you realize by manually adjusting it's not actually helping, so you're not going to manually adjust?
So the idea is you do not want to manually adjust as very often if you can help it, right? I don't go in and say, Bo Bichette, I don't like this number. I'm going to now change his homers for a certain thing. I don't do that at all. What I do on a group level is I take a cohort of, players who were injured a certain year. How have they shown the rebound?
I see.
And I try to adjust it on a global basis for players that have that kind of perspective in their own modeling. And then I know what, on average, the adjustment is plus 10 down or plus 10 up, right? I apply some kind of very general thing on a broad basis. The manual part comes in the rate for me is deciding on the cohort of a player, right? This player had the down year. This player had this anomaly. And if I can do that manually, I do that. The manual adjustments I make more is playing time, where I get a playing time that I think is nonsense, or all players who are coming back from injury get a minus 5% adjustment in playing time. I know that is the best outcome because when I've put together my regression formulas, I've noticed that if you take that 5% or whatever it comes out to be and apply it to everybody who has coming back from an injury, I know that makes a better projection, right? So it's not a manual thing, it's a global thing, but it's done where I can put people in the right cohorts of problem here, problem there, etc. Does that make sense?
Love it. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I think that's the proper way to do it. So that lines up with my brain as well.
Exactly. So, people ask you, ATC's automatic. It's not something that I just press a button, here it goes. I press a button and here it goes. That would be really easy. I press a button, here it goes, but then I know I have to make those adjustments to make it even ever better.
Yep.
Going back to the free agents, we've seen those two guys take deals that are more short-term with opt-out after this year, opt-out after next year. What's your take on how we're going to see free agents in the top tier going forward? Are we going to see more of these heavy opt-out short-term, high AAV deals, or are you going to see more of the 10-year, $30 million a year, but lock it in? What are we going to see going forward?
Great question. Yeah, I struggle a little bit to differentiate whether this is a byproduct of the coming lockout, and I think that maybe perhaps in 4 to 5 years we'll look back and go, oh yeah, it was kind of like a weird period of time where we saw a lot of these short-year, high AV contracts that were taken by players. But I do believe in the instance of Bichette and Tucker, if I remember correctly, they had longer-term deals on the table, or am I thinking of Tucker specifically? I think the Blue Jays gave him a pretty long-term deal, and he ended up opting for the Dodger contract specifically. So in that case in particular, maybe tough to understand. It's probably better to work with the pool of like, here are all the contract offers he got, but of course we're not going to get that, to understand like how the market's actually behaving. I think for the most part, what teams are perhaps realizing, and all of them are globbing together on, is like, yeah, I mean, sometimes the back end of these contracts that are longer really bad. So like, how do we mitigate that risk as much as possible? And I wonder whether in the past there hasn't been as much of an appetite to really push up and pay a guy 45 plus AAV in order to get him and mitigate some of that longer term risk. So that's, I would imagine it is more that. It's more we're getting the financial flexibility from teams. We have some of these titans in the industry with Cohen and the Guggenheim Group with the Dodgers and such, that they're willing to really go kind of wild on the short AAV and not really care too much about the luxury tax impact in order to like mitigate some of the longer term risk. This is like the problem with some of the pitching contracts as well. Like Framber Valdez, that's another one where I don't know how many people think that's going to age well if he gets 4 to 5 years. So like, does that end up being like a 2 to 3 year deal, which I imagine his camp probably doesn't want because they want the long-term security. It's a tough thing to predict, partially because I think predicting contracts in general is difficult to do. But I would say it's more teams are willing to jack up AAV in order to mitigate risk long-term. And I don't know, maybe players are willing to take those deals more, and because of the lockout, it feels like there's some variables that are crossing over here that are hard sometimes to separate. But I think they're all in play to some extent, and that's perhaps a byproduct of why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, players, they would want the short-term high AV deals in the front of their career, and then at some point just take that long one that gets you there. I've always said that I like these opt-out deals because, to me, if a player exercises his opt-out, it means that the team has made the money on them for that term, right?
That's a good point.
Right? Pete Alonso, obviously, if you're a Met fan, you don't want Pete Alonso to leave. But the fact that Pete Alonso opted out of his contract means you got way more out of that first year that you paid him than he was worth, right? His WAR per dollar that you paid him was excellent in the team's favor. So to me, I love the opt-outs. It encourages players to do better, right? Because oh my goodness, now there's a higher payday in store. So I'm always for that. And I do think that you're right, that teams are worried about those tail years. I mean, look at Juan Soto, not to harp on the Mets. I mean, when is that contract going to go sour? 4 years from now? 5 years from now?
It's a good point, yeah.
And then they got to pay him 10 years after that, right? So it's I definitely understand it, especially for pitchers. Pitchers, for sure, at the tail end, they're not going to make. Look at Garrett Cole right now of the Yankees. Yeah. I mean, that's headed pretty badly. You do player analysis, and, before I talk about some individual players, if you hear that in the offseason, a player says, oh, I went to Driveline this offseason, do you take that as meaningful in terms of player that player is going to outperform, or is it simply noise? It's like saying, oh, I'm in the best shape of my life, which we know is complete noise and doesn't mean anything.
It's a great point. I have a couple of layers. This was probably one of my favorite questions when you threw me the rundown, because I think it's developed for me over time. What I'll say is, like, when I look at projections, and this is I'm kind of jumping one of the questions you have later, but one of the ways I like use projections is really to create like a baseline. And I would say, like, I think as with the fantasy football I play, like player takes are really important. And I think a lot of the time what we're trying to hunt for, if you're looking at a projection, is like, where could this projection be wrong? Or perhaps the way I look at it most of the time when I'm trying to find like breakout guys is like, what do I think is not in this projection that could influence the projection in one direction or another? Particularly with pitchers in particular, I think that usage, new pitches, velo jumps, a lot of those things matter in the sense that I can look at a projection and go, okay, if this is the 50th percentile outcome here, like maybe I'm thinking this is more like 55th, 60th. And then that gives me some basis to say, how much do I actually believe that? How confident am I in it? Have I talked to anybody in the org or related to the player from like a trainer standpoint that I could kind of back into how confident they are in this change sticking long term? And maybe that's the improper way to approach things, but that is kind of how I look at projections a lot of the time. I use it as my base. I make sure I understand what's actually captured in that such that I'm not double counting. And then I go from there in terms of trying to ID what I think could change. And I think one of the ways I like looking at changes is through like wholesale changes, like organizational philosophy changes. So I know I teased like Jake Irvin at the beginning of this, but I'm working on a YouTube video talking about like pitchers who were really bad last year. How can they not be bad this year? And Jake Irvin was one of the worst pitchers in baseball last year among qualified pitchers. Entirely new regime with the Nationals, right? So in my brain, I'm going, okay, perhaps I think there's some more fragile elements to some of those Nationals projections because you have a new pitching coach, new assistant pitching coach, new GM. Like they loon out it. They went in there and tore up everyone and went to the point
and projections won't actually give that, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like if I'm confident that the Nats are going to pull down, say, four-seam usage on all their pitchers, which would be my bet right now, like how would that affect projections? Like, can I try to back into how it would affect? Would it be worse? Would it actually make these guys worse? Or are there particular pitchers where I think it would make them better? So a lot of the time, that's how I'm kind of approaching things. And I think that when a player says they went to Driveline, to tie this back to the initial question, what they're saying is something changed. And I think personally it's valuable. I'm not entirely sure if we have like holistic research understanding whether it actually is, if there's just like a binary, he went to Driveline, and then let's look at his projection. Do we have those guys that went to Driveline beating their projections more often? I know Driveline tracks this, I believe, internally. So one of the big pitches they have to their players is
obviously.
They're guys like, hey,
yes.
Yeah, they're looking at a WAR projection and saying like, okay, can we make your WAR projection better? What is our thesis here? Like we think by changing X or Y, we can push up your ERA or push down your ERA to the point where your WAR jumps 0.5 and you're making another 500K. Like they have to, I think making it objective is probably the way to approach it from like a training facility standpoint. What I will say is that I think we've gotten to the point where I would say a lot of Driveline philosophies have permeated organizations to the point where I don't know if the advantage of he went to Driveline is as significant as it was, say, 3 to 4 years ago. Because I feel like a lot of the Driveline philosophies are ones that are in orgs. Or like a lot of people who were at Driveline 4 years ago are now in organizations making really important decisions. I think of director of pitching from the Mets, Eric Yeager's director of pitching from the Marlins, Bill Hiesel. Like there's a lot of people from Driveline who were at Driveline 4 or 5 years ago who are now making those decisions such that I don't know how much of an advantage it is anymore to be like, I went to Driveline. So that you could see how that kind of conflicts or butts heads a little with my idea that I'm trying to like find things that projections aren't capturing. I think that the hitting side with Driveline is one that has kind of taken off a bit. And I think that's because they've done a really good job with integration of data. And I do think that's like kind of the more artsy player development angle. And as a result of that, it's probably going to be a little bit slower adopted. So I think my brain is flipped towards trying to ID the hitters who went to Driveline and understand what they have changed rather than looking at the pitching side. So like a Jordan Walker, a James Wood, like a lot of those guys in the Nationals hitting department now are from Driveline. I think of their assistant hitting coach, Andrew Ite, who was running, I believe, the Arizona facility. Like, I think that's somewhat significant from a James Wood standpoint. Now, how it's significant is a great question. And same with Jordan Walker. Like, he's a dude that, like, just absolutely blitzes the ball, but, like, just can't find any production. He's been at Driveline. Like, is that going to help him? How is it going to help him? So I more so would say I like put a pin in the guys. I think I have like a running note sheet on the guys who've went to Driveline, and I like take a peek at their projections, and I'm going into that situation understanding that maybe I think the range of outcomes here is a little bit flatter in terms of like maybe we see some awesome returns or perhaps we see some downside, especially for a guy that maybe adds a lot of velocity then blowing out or something along those lines. So long answer there, but I think I brought you through hopefully some of my thought process around where we've been, where we are, and like kind of how I try to maximize my ability to project who's going to beat the projection.
Let's talk some rookie breakouts or potential breakouts. I know you were talking about in a video a couple of pitchers that you thought were fantastic. Jonah Tong of the Mets, Peyton Tolley, Trey Savage, and I'll throw in Bubba Chandler as well. What are your thoughts on some of them as far as if they can really be the rookie breakout pitcher for 2026?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. I think I've always been kind of I'll start with the Savage. I've been the low man on him. I just think it's a really weird look. Perhaps my brain's still a little bit clouded by some of the injury stuff that teams pushed him down in the draft from. Although we haven't really seen that come to be. So maybe I'm pulling on a prior there that is not something I should be leaning on. I just think his mix in particular is one that doesn't lend itself to the modern angle of like pitch diversity, which I wonder if it creates some problems with him from like a how can I turn over lineups and how can I actually be valuable from like a total pitcher standpoint as opposed to just a dude that can have these spurts where he's really, really good. So, I mean, you have a pretty strong projection on him here, 135 innings, 3.89 ERA. I don't know. I struggle with him for some reason. Like, I think the split's really good. I'm not sure his locations are good. Everything he has moves arm side. I don't think he's ever going to be able to throw a shape that moves glove side based on how his arm works in his slot. he's just a really weird pitcher. And maybe that gets back to the point of like, maybe I'm just less confident in anything I see on him. I'm going to hesitate to say that he holds like a 3.9 ERA. I think the strikeout upside's awesome. I think he'll have spurts where he's really good. He had some starts last year, even in the midst of some of the bad starts he had, where he was really solid. Like his first game, that debut game was awesome. Next game wasn't that good. Subsequent game against Tampa, again, he faced was also fantastic. And then we obviously saw the postseason where he was really good. But
the strikeout potential, I think, is there. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah, the overall package, though, if I had to take my guess by ATC, I actually don't believe it like you. I'm on the low side. I actually would go over on the 3.9 if I had to guess.
I'm on the same page. Yeah.
The market, if we're looking at the NFBC and pricing their fantasy market, I mean, ATC shows him as about a $7 player, and the market is over $10 on him. So the market is even, if you think ATC is optimistic, the market is even way more optimistic, and that might be recency bias and playoff bias and all that. Any of the others that I mentioned strike you?
Yeah, Tong is a good one in this idea what we were talking about of like, let me try to ID something that he's going to change. Like your projection on him, I think is pretty solid as I poke at it here. He's a guy that I was going to do a piece or a video at some point on pitches that I expect to be added. So kind of preempting what we start to hear in spring of like, this guy added a cutter or he changed his changeup. I was thinking of trying to ID the guys that I think that would happen to. Tong is one where I think he just needs some kind of glove side shape. Like he needs some kind of slider cutter thing. And I imagine the Mets are very aware of this. Like he threw one back in 24. It went through a ton of variations in terms of what he was actually doing with it. Standpoint, so to speak. So he had, it was, I think, a really cutter-ish pitch at one point, then it turned into more of like a downer slider. It's a fascinating angle to exactly he becomes from that shape standpoint and how much that shape helps him longer term. So I think that is one that I would ID as like, he will add this pitch. And again, how does that affect the projection remains to be seen. He gave up a pretty good amount of, I think his barrel rate was pretty high in the small sample we saw last year. Yeah, 8 barrels in 18 2/3 innings, not particularly strong. I'm still pretty on him. But this is an interesting crop of pitchers, Tong, Tolley, Savage, Chandler, because I think they all are really electric and had awesome success in the minors. But at the same time, they are guys that I think need to change things in order to be good major league pitchers. Wouldn't say any of them's like a Nolan McLean where they come up and it's like, wow, look at the diversity of mix and like ability to attack lefties and righties. And like he looks fantastic, and I think a lot of people would have him as like their 1-1 in terms of a prospect list. But I think Tong and these other guys have some maturation to go through in order to actually improve from a how do we project this guy going forward standpoint.
Yeah. Oh, clearly Tong was rushed up because the Mets had a big need for pitching at the end of last year. But yeah, you can see that he did need a little bit of maturation. I mean, he spent 3 days maybe in AAA, right, before they brought him up. So, and as a Met fan, hopefully that goes well. He does seem like if you add in that other pitch, then that would even do wonders. You touched on pitch mix and changing it and adding pitches, and I'll say this, that one of the blind spots of projections is that it doesn't account for pitch mix changes. If a pitcher is going to throw more fastballs or throw more sliders or splitters or whatever, it's not really accounted for in projections, right? You're projecting the same pitch mix to go forward from prior years. And I think the next step in pitcher projection is sort of going to be track pitcher performance on a pitch-by-pitch type basis, and then be able to adjust for that on the fly and say, okay, well, he's throwing 20% instead of 10% more on the curveball. Well, now just up that in the model and put that in. I know that you're big on pitch mix key, and what are your thoughts about that, and what, in general, you think are going to be the pitch mix trends that you're going to see this coming year?
Yeah, I love that. I've had an idea for a while of like, maybe it's you, maybe someone building out some kind of projection where, let's say it's a tool where at the top you have the projection and below that we somehow have some ability to adjust pitch usage or even pitch type, but that's going to be a little wackier based on like assuming what exactly the shape is and when it's used. But it would basically be like the ability for me to go in and look at projection and say, okay, historically when we see four-seam fastball drop on similar arms like this, what happens? Such that if I take someone's 45% four-seam fastball to left-handed hitters and drop it down to 35%, and then, factoring in the puzzle here, figure out another pitch to bring up.
Teams have to be doing that right now, I would imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think it's somewhat maybe it's too in the weeds. But I would enjoy that from like a raw projection standpoint, and then seeing how exactly the projection would change. Maybe it has to get as specific as talking about handedness usage and understanding like, okay, this guy's a deficiency versus left-handed hitters as a right-hand pitcher. Like, what could we change here in order to actually improve his projection? And in real time, I would see the projection update for strikeouts, walks, maybe per barrel or something along those lines, and then see the output of the ERA drop or rise. And perhaps what we end up seeing is like projection maybe doesn't dramatically change a lot. But I do think that's maybe an interesting way to approach things, as opposed to just like looking at the raw projection and going, yeah, absolutely, this is what I'm going to take. And then we hear a lot in spring about a guy like changing a bunch or his velo's up, and then we don't adjust. But at the same time, I will admit, I myself, Nick Pollock, Eno Saris, Eric Smolsky, all like tracked new pitches last spring, and we had this large Google sheet going, which I think had like 40 names in it and pitches we heard at least that the guy was adding. And I remember glancing at it midway through the year, and I think every single one of the things that pitcher added was like completely irrelevant to his performance. Like Gavin Williams was a good one. Like his fastball was better, his slot kind of changed, and they changed his usage. And like for the first couple months of the season, he was awful, And then he ended up being really good, but it was funny to me to look back and go, we were kind of maybe overreacting to all of these subtle changes. So I guess I'm trying to be aware of how incorrect I could be on the usefulness of a tool like that. But I do think it would be a fun way for me, at least in my brain from a content creation standpoint, to like think about how projections would change if I'm assuming that X, Y, or Z happens. Like I was just looking at Zach Gallen, for example. He threw a sinker for a period of time last year, then kind of backed off it. He had really bad results versus right-handed hitters. Talking to some other organizations, I'm very aware that I think that pitch will be pushed from a usage standpoint and perhaps adjusted from like how he's throwing it, because the shape he was creating wasn't totally conducive to ground balls. It was pretty like vertical pitch. So I think there's some teams that are like, we could get more drop on this and have him use it 30% of the time to right-handed hitters and move off the four seam. Like that feels like a pretty substantial way to like assume that Zach Gallen changes the righty approach that he had last year, which wasn't particularly effective. But again, how do we bake that into a projection? Is there a way for me to manually go into some projection and go, yeah, okay, I can take the sinker usage from 8% and jump it to 24% and pull the four seam down? Then what is the result there? Okay, K's drop, maybe ground ball goes up, we see fewer barrels. Like, I think that is a tool that I've kind of been hunting in my brain for a bit. When I look at projections of just like trying to understand if I'm assuming X or Y happens, how does it actually change what I'm going to see in the results?
Yeah, and we know teams are doing something like that, and it's funny, but certain pitchers might appeal more to certain teams. If a certain team is more into the four-seam fastball, and they say, what if we apply this guy's repertoire and increase the usage of that? It might appeal to them. Oh, we can do more wonders with this guy than he has been before. So I can definitely see that. I use the term Corbinize to denote when a pitcher just has really good success in one pitch, so he throws so much more out of it. And the guy I use is Patrick Corbin, who had a fantastic slider, and he said, you know what? Let's just throw 70% sliders, and let's just go with my best pitch. Do you think we're going to see more of that in baseball, or do you foresee that we're going to see more pitchers spreading out their pitch mix more to keep batters guessing from what they're going to throw?
My bet is that we see more of the mix spread. And I say that because I like the Corbinize angle, but I think perhaps what that Corbinize angle is caught in was a period of time where like the understanding of seam effects and orientation wasn't as ubiquitous, such that now what I think we're getting to is like the angle where a team can look at a guy and go, okay, I could get 6 pitches in here that our internal stuff model thinks are all like roughly around the same quality. Maybe a guy has a lean or a tendency where it's like, man, your ability to spin the ball is great, so your lateral breaking balls are all going to be really good. But you're seeing a lot more pitchers where there's this Orioles pitcher up at AAA for them, Trey Gibson, who I like a lot, who I think we'll see this year. He's got 4 breaking balls, or I guess if you consider the cutter a breaking ball, 4 breaking balls. He throws like a sweeper, he throws a downer curve, then he has this other kind of like tweener, death ball, downer slider, and then he has a cutter on top of it. They just added the cutter at the end of the year. He spins the ball really well, he throws hard. Like his MO is going to be, let me throw all these pitches in some sequence that is confusing to hitters such that they don't entirely know what's coming. I don't know whether we will have as consistently a batch of pitchers where it's like, you have this best pitch, which is clearly your best pitch, therefore you should throw it more. My bet is that with how ubiquitous like seam effect understanding and pitch design has become that like the floor on everyone's pitches are going to start to rise or have already risen to the point where it's more optimal to keep spreading and throwing pitches in somewhat of like a, let's say, a random sequence, or you run into a count, let's say like a 2-1 count, you need like a contact neutralizer. A guy has 2 or 3 contact neutralizers that say an expected run value or some other expected metric thinks are all similar in this count. What we'll see then is like you take those 3 pitches and split their usage into thirds. Same with like 2-strike situations. It's like, okay, you have 3 pitches, they all generate comparable chase to righties as a righty pitcher. Then what we will see that guy do is throw a third in those pitches as opposed to leaning on an individual pitch. To me, that feels like the natural sequence to occur after everyone's mix continues to expand, because I don't really think that angle is going to slow down with how just everywhere pitch design is. It seems like every team is able to do it now in some capacity that's successful. I think we're going to start to see less of the like, oh, the Dodgers added this guy and all of a sudden he was throwing a sweeper and a cutter and wow, look at how much better he is. I just think the majority of teams are going to be able to execute that relatively well, to the point where the future optimization then comes from how are you going to actually use those pitches as opposed to the Corbinites angle you're talking about of like one of these is the best, just throw it more. Of course, we're going to have outliers. I'm still fascinated by Hunter Green, who basically throws 2 pitches. And, you know, I've talked to people who are like, I'm confident he could throw 3 more. You could give him a sinker to righties. You can give him an actual sweeper. You should throw the split more. Give him a curve, you know. And yet, like, he's an amazing pitcher with 2 pitches. So we're always going to run into outliers. But I think a lot of the time, those outliers are skirting the point of, like, what is the average pitcher? What is the guy with, like, a 4.2 ERA projection, 4.3 ERA projection going to do? And I think that is perhaps more important in understanding, like, where we are at as baseball rather than IDing the outlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that pitchers are going to optimize to their own ability, and for the ones that more pitches in the sequence matters more, they're going to optimize to that. And for the Mariano Rivera types who have 1 pitch and it's the cutter and you just do it, they're going to do more of that, right?
Reliever starter angle is interesting, too, to consider like how those evolve. I wonder if we're going to get like relievers throwing way more pitches. But I agree with you, and that is probably the angle where we see more contraction around a shape.
Yeah.
Particularly because there's no risk of like exposure multiple times through.
And they're also throwing more max velocity, right?
Exactly, yeah. So there's probably more of a standout pitch there that it's like, no, this is the best pitch here. We don't really want you throwing a sinker. Perhaps my angle is all about starters. Like I really think starters will see less and less of the Corbinization of arsenals.
Now you mentioned Eno Saris. Have you seen his algorithm?
Was that the advertisement he did? Yeah.
Oh, you do know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. That was hilarious. I was joking with him at one of the winter meetings or Sabre seminar that he comes out to in Chicago here. That was hilarious. With Pudge Rodriguez, right?
That's so right. Pudge Rodriguez. And here they are in their underwear. And there you go. You know. But on a serious note, he does have his Stuff Plus. And do you use that? What do you draw from his Stuff Plus model?
Yeah, I do use Stuff Plus. I would say I use it a little bit less. I think what we're running into, like, I talked to Eno a little bit about this, but I'm sure he's mentioned it on some pods. Maybe I've missed it. But I think as his models become a bit more predictive, I do think we've lost a little bit of the, like, I can look at an individual pitch through his Stuff Plus lens and understand what that pitch is doing or the quality of that offering. I think I've lost a little bit of that, I would say, around things. I still think on the aggregate it's fantastic from, like, let me just look at the total Stuff Plus, location plus, pitching plus. Like, that gives you a really, really holistic view of a pitcher. But I would say once you drill down into, like, the individual nature of things, I lose a little bit of, like, the ability where a couple years ago, because we were just going off, like, a couple variables, like, my brain is still somewhat tuned to, like, those variables of, like, release height, velo, the raw movement of the pitch. Once we started adding in, like, angles and stuff, I started to understand it a bit. But I do believe Eno brings in usage and fastball usage or prior fastball mix and some other angles, which to me loses the ability for me to look at, say, a fastball at a 105 and go, like, yes, I know exactly what I expect this shape to be. You know, like, there's a pretty good amount of examples of, like, pitches that I just found fascinating that his Stuff model liked. And I think I'm not in any way critiquing him. I think what I would like is a better understanding on, like, why, you know, and this is always the problem perhaps with models that are a little muddier in terms of, like, let me parse out exactly why this pitch is like a 105. That's what I want to understand. Cause like models are only as valuable, like models are valuable when they deviate from your expectations. So if I look at a shape from my brain that's tuned to the old Magnus models that a lot of Stuff Plus was based on, and I go, this pitch should be great. And then I look at Eno's model and says it's like a a 77, or let's maybe exaggerate, but let's say it's like an 85, where the average for that shape, say like a 98, like on a four-seam fastball. And I go, I'm surprised. Like, based on my quick read of his extension, his release height, the velo, the shape, I would expect this to be like an average to above average fastball. Why is it a below average fastball? To me, that is like what I want to know. And we're at a point where I don't necessarily think I can answer that, or someone can answer that for me.
We have to get Eno back on the show.
I know, yeah. I know, and I think in talking to him briefly on this point, like it's the nature of the beast. Like, as it's become more predictive, and I don't want to speak for him, but this is my understanding of it. Is like, as it's become more predictive, and it has from how he structured it, the ability to like totally understand why things are graded as they are is tough, And I think that maybe perhaps it's lost a little bit of utility for me in that sense, just based on how I've used it. But, I think maybe I have to adapt to rather than like they have to adapt to me. I just would love I'd love a more clear understanding of why certain shapes are graded as they are. Because I do think the model's valuable when it tells you something isn't as good as you think it is, just from like your raw initial impression, if you understand pitch movement and other things. So that's the thing. It's hard. It's frustrating for me when I can't close that gap on my knowledge of like, oh, I know why this pitch is a 120, or I know why this pitch is a 110. When I can't, it's like tough for me to be like content, if that makes any sense, because I'm always trying to like understand where I could be wrong. That's just gonna make me better from an analysis standpoint.
So we're talking a lot of pitchers. I do want to touch very briefly on batters in terms of bat speed. I know the Oopsie projection system by Jared Rosenblum really focuses on bat speed. I mean, Aaron Judge is going to be the best player because of his super elite bat speed. What has been your research and understanding of how much the bat speed? We know it correlates, but how much of it as a predictor do you feel is worth it in the bat speed?
Yeah, it's a good point. I do find myself going towards the Oopsie projection knowing that angle. And I think it's super important. And I would say this. I would say my hitting analysis at the major league level perhaps isn't as polished as some of my pitching analysis. So I'm still trying to learn here on like all the new things that we have from like a contact point standpoint. I would say like where I've been exposed more is on the minor league side. And I would say in talking to people and looking at things, there's a lot of focus on bat speed in the minors, just from like a raw what damage can you do standpoint. And perhaps that's causing some of the minor league analysis to miss certain guys. But I do think like looking at that relative to contact rate, relative to like in zone whiff, understanding whether there's some kind of path problem where like the bat speed's really high, but he can't cover a particular part of the zone. And then talking to people in organizations or talking to the organization about said player that I'm looking at is often like how I arrive at things. And I really think bat speed is like a tentpole. It's incredibly important. But I would say my gut right now in like starting to delve a little bit more into hitter analysis, the major league level and such, is that as you rise to the major league level, it probably is slightly less important, if that makes sense. Whereas in the minors, like the exit velocities are really, really important. Like you got to be doing something at an insane rate otherwise in order for me to be like super encouraged about you as a player. But also in the minors as well, you have to project some increases in terms of like a maturation. And that's somewhat of a difficult thing to do. Like I can pull averages.
It's like a leading
based
indicator, right? It's like with it's pitch velocity with pitchers, essentially.
And teams internally too. I mean, it's a great drawing the correlation to pitch velocity is a great point, because a lot of the time, like we might look at a guy and go, "Man, he needs to add velocity," and it's like, well, do we know if he can? Or like the thing I run into a bit that I know teams are obviously on is like the body type of a hitter at AA at 21 years old or 20 years old. Like, should I project another full tick or 2 ticks on his 90th percentile exit velocity here? Or is his body actually maxed out from like a force production standpoint such that the team internally doesn't project any more bat speed increases? Like I know some teams have like biometrics and force production things that create like an expected bat speed and then back into, let's actualize that expected bat speed over time over like a 2 to 3 year plan. Now you could probably see this with certain guys like skinnier high school kids. Like, yeah, he's going to get into a pro strength program and improve as a hitter. But it's tougher when you look at the guys who, like a Zahir Hope from the Dodgers is a great example. That dude is like, I'm not going to be the guy that looks at a body and goes, he needs, he can add more bat speed because he can get bigger. But Zahir Hope is huge. Like his lower body is massive. He's a massive dude. My expectation there is like that guy's probably not going to add as much bat speed as like the 6th round high schooler that the Brewers just drafted, who's 6'3", 170, So like those things are often tough on the bat speed side. Whereas like when we look at the major league level, I think it's not flat in the sense it can't change, but I do think it's perhaps less malleable than it is when the guy's in the minors. So I think I'm trying to flip my brain more to the major league side, whereas in the last year or so, I've been more focused on like trying to understand what teams are looking at in the minors and hitters in order to project the said guy as a major league impact bat.
Right. No, those are fantastic takes. Hey, I wanted to end off with projections, and I know we touched on it earlier, and we did a little bit about the ATC. But how do you use projections in general, and of course, how in particular do you use the ATC projections?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like it's really important to have a baseline and have a baseline you trust. And I use ATC a bit because I enjoy the fact that you're looking at multiple projections to sum into your projection, which I think, again, you mentioned before we got going, I think here that it reduces like the parameter risk on one projection loving a guy in a certain direction.
Exactly.
And I think that's particularly important on like the oopsie side of things, as we're talking about with like bringing in bat speed and bringing in these other things. Because as you look through projections, you'll often see like oopsie stands out in one direction or another on guys. Like looking at Jonah Tong, right? Like they have him for a 3-4, it's only 45 inning projection, but 3.46 in 45 innings versus you at a 4.03. Like 0.5 is a pretty big difference. They have his K rate almost a full K and a half per nine higher. Probably, was that from a strikeout rate standpoint? It's probably a bit higher, right? Yeah, like 5 percentage points, 3.5. Excuse me. Yeah, so I'd say it's really important to have like a good structured baseline, and then I use that baseline to then work off and understand, where am I comfortable? Like player takes, I really think are incredibly important in the industry because projections have gotten so good. And understanding what projections are accounting for and not accounting for, and making sure that I'm threading through in terms of understanding why I actually am more bullish or less bullish on a given player. But you got to have a baseline. I do in fantasy football, and it's really important for trying to call breakout picks in baseball as well. It's like, where's the industry thinking this guy will go? Why do I think it could be either worse or better? And that making sure that projection is somewhat dialed is super important. So yeah, I'm constantly looking at projections and understanding the range of them as well. And that's, I think, why I end up landing on you more often than not, is because it's tough for me to like totally understand the bat versus oopsie versus steamer to the point where it's like, okay, well, I'll just take the middle ground. I won't say the middle ground, but a lot of the time the thing that looks at all those and goes, okay, this is what we're thinking. And I go from there, especially for communication to the public on YouTube and Substack and such. Like, it's just easier to go with, hey, this is like the projection that's looking at all the projections, as opposed to going, hey, I'm just using oopsie here because of X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of where I land on things, I would say. Hopefully that makes sense.
That's what it is. I mean, ATC takes the best and the brightest of all the projections. There's some projections better for pitching, some better for hitting, and ATC does the best of both. So it gives you the middle ground. And, the way I use it, and I was talking on the NFBC auction pod yesterday, is that ATC is more about frequency than magnitude. It's more about getting a buy or sell signal than it is about magnitude. ATC, because of the way that it aggregates and goes to the middle, it's not going to predict this, oh my God, he's going to have a breakout 60 home run player. You're not going to do that. Oopsie might do that, right? But you're not going to see that with ATC. But what it will do is it'll stop you from buying players where you shouldn't. If a player is going to be undervalued, more likely ATC will show it than somebody who's overvalued, right? Steamer is not going to catch as many errors as ATC is in terms of buy sell. You'll be right directionally more with ATC than anything else. And so if you are playing fantasy baseball, having it as a buy sell, ATC is definitely a higher percentage chance than the others. Sure, you'll miss out on getting the extremes, the $1 player that turns into a $15 player. You might do better with other projections, but in the long run, you're going to get more calls right, especially with players that matter.
Yep, love it.
All right, I think that's about it. Before we go, why don't you, Lance, just remind everyone where we can find your work and all things Lance Brozdowski.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on X. I'm on, I think, all the socials here, TikTok and Instagram, etc. YouTube and Substack are the two things I'm always trying to push to. Substack, I'm changing the structure of slightly coming into the season, but it'll still pretty much be my nightly exercise to look through the league on specifically through the pitcher lens and understand what guys are changing. And I really enjoy doing that. It sounds like a lot of people find it valuable. The YouTube is more like, let me think through topics that I'll eventually talk about on air. It's honestly my cheat for it, and it's become somewhat popular, so I've really enjoyed growing that as well. So those are the two places I would say are the best to consume kind of my thoughts and my takes as we get into the 2026 season.
I definitely recommend you guys checking out Lance's YouTube page. The videos are excellent. They're well done, well organized, and a lot of fun to watch, so please do that. And thanks again, Lance, for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we'll be back next week. Ruvain out this week on vacation. We'll be back next week where we'll go continue on our position undervalued previews, strategy sessions, as always we do on this show, and so much more as the fantasy season has just begun. The draft prep is started. ATC projections are out. Happy ATC Day to everybody. You can get them on Fangraphs, on Rotoballer, RotoWire, and Yahoo Sports. So please check them out. Okay, once again, thanks so much to our guest for today, Lance Brozdowski. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.